All right, thank you for joining me. In the previous video, I walked everybody through why the translation of Genesis 1:1, "In the beginning God created the heavens and earth," was likely not the correct translation that we should be using or what the original Hebrew intended. Now, when we look at the grammar, the vocabulary, the cultural settings, what we found was that "in the beginning" was most likely a mistranslation. This doesn't mean that the people did it weren't smart. They were going off of what they originally had available to them. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have access to cultural resources and stuff like that. They didn't have that kind of information. So they would probably give it what they thought was most likely correct, which they believed was "in the beginning." Now, the more accurate translation, however, based upon all the new information we have, is that one that fits better with the language and the worldview and the people who actually lived and wrote it and told the stories to one another, is when is a translation which says, "When God began to create the heavens and the earth." And this one thing, as I mentioned, it changes everything. It tells us that Genesis 1:1 is not about an absolute beginning of matter or space or time, really. It's not about a point in time. It's about when God stepped into a disordered world and he began to assign function, purpose, and order. To our modern ears, this might sound strange because we're not used to hearing things like this. We've been trained to fixate on one thing, that things begin to exist at a certain point, that we don't really understand a different type of people and how they view things. Because we're assuming that if something physically exists, if it takes up space, if it has atoms or weight, then it exists. But in the ancient world, they didn't think this way. To them, something didn't truly exist unless it had a role, unless it served a purpose in the ordered world. So when Genesis says that the earth was formless and void, it wasn't describing a non-existence of matter, but it was an existence without order. It was a world not yet ready for meaning, for civilization, chaos, and that's where we're going to pick up here. We're going to look at verses 3 through 5 at first, and I'm going to be reading it real quick. I'm going to be using the New King James Version. It's not because I think it's the best version out there, or I'm a New King James Version only person. It's just the one I'm most comfortable with. I grew up with it, so I just naturally like it. But it says, starting with verse 3, "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, and God called it the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and morning were the first day." So let's stop here. Let's take a closer look at this, because God says that there will be light, but he doesn't define light in the way that we might define it. He doesn't talk about photons, electromagnetic radiation, wavelengths, or quantum particles. He doesn't even try to explain any of that. But what he does instead, he names it. And in naming it, he's defining its function. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. That may seem like a small detail, but it's actually a profound clue into how the biblical authors understood existence. Light doesn't exist because it's there. It exists because it functions. The light becomes day, the part of the time when humans are up and ready and we can see the visible world. And the darkness becomes night when human activity slows, rest begins, and the cycle of time is defined here, right? So God doesn't just create light, he instills it into the structure of the world's rhythm. He assigns it a role. And this is really the key. The naming here is not ontological. It's not trying to tell us what the light is made out of. It's functional. It's telling us what light does, what it is for. Genesis isn't interested in the chemistry or the physics of light. It doesn't even mention a source for the light until day 4. That alone should tell us we're not dealing with a scientific account, because the Bible's not a scientific book. No matter how much people want to try and say it's a scientific book, we can know the truth of how it should happen scientifically, but it's not. It's just simply not a science book. Instead, Genesis 1 it's shaping a theological vision. It's a cosmic map, and what matters in this map is not what things are made of, but how things work in God's ordered world. So this fits perfectly with how the ancient Eastern people understood reality. In their view, to exist didn't mean to physically occupy space. It meant to have a role in the world's ordered system. It meant to be named, known, and given a purpose. So when God creates light, he's not flipping a switch on a new physical substance. He's assigning a function. He's creating, basically, here's the cosmic clock. Day and night begin. Time begins to flow. Creation in this sense isn't about building a machine. It's about setting that machine to work. It's about bringing order out of chaos, meaning out of silence, structure out of the void. Reflect on that as we're going on, because Genesis verses 3 through 5, it's showing us that the Bible's first concern is not what's being made, but what things are made for. And I think that's really an interesting way of looking at it too, because it's telling us a lot. Light exists not because God summoned photons from nothing. What he's telling us is that it exists because he gave it a job. It now has a purpose, a rhythm, a place in the cycle of time. This kind of thinking actually is going to shape everything in Genesis 1 here. And we can continue, we can go to Genesis 6:8 and read it. And this is the part where things start to get a little uncomfortable for a lot of modern readers, such as young earth creationists, because if we insist on reading Genesis as if it were a modern scientific text, we run straight into a wall, literally. A solid dome, to be precise, because in Genesis it says God created a firmament, a word at least in Hebrew, which literally comes from the root meaning to spread out, to hammer out, like metal in an ancient world. And so the people would be picturing a sky as a solid dome that held back cosmic waters. But to our modern ears, this idea sounds primitive. And this is one of the things that a lot of people point out to young earth creationists who try and tell us this is literal. They go, yeah, you can't believe this because this is crazy. But here's the thing. Genesis isn't trying to teach us astronomy. The text is not affirming a dome as a scientific truth. It's using the mental picture of the time, anyways. Sorry. The way that the ancient people would imagine the sky to communicate something deeper, namely that God is bringing order out of chaos. He's not describing the mechanics of the atmosphere. He's describing a boundary being drawn, a space being carved out, a place for life to thrive beneath the waters above and below. So if you approach Genesis like a scientific book, yes, the firmament becomes a problem. The sky isn't solid. There's no cosmic oceans up there. But if you read it in the way that the ancients would have read it, as a theological declaration, not a scientific diagram, then it makes perfect sense, because God's not building a dome. He's assigning a function. He's making space. He's turning wild, chaotic waters. Wow, somebody got some loud music back there. Something's going on at the college. But anyways, he's turning wild, chaotic waters into a structure, a world with rhythm, purpose, and order. And so, I really need to get a drink. So when some say, that just proves Genesis is outdated, usually the atheists, and say that the Bible thought that the people in the Bible thought the sky was a dome, so therefore it's wrong, case closed, they're not really understanding the argument, and they're missing the point, because in light of how the Bible should be read, at least, they're missing it, because Genesis isn't teaching us cosmology. It isn't, again, it's not a science book. It's theology. It's about meaning, not mechanics. When the Bible speaks of the firmament, it's not making a claim about atmospheric pressure or the curvature of the earth. It's speaking of a language of its time to reveal the heart of its message, that God is not just a craftsman, he's an organizer, a ruler, a king who steps into the chaos and builds order. And this idea isn't unique to Israel, it's found elsewhere. Again, I brought up the Babylonian god, when he splits that chaos dragon in half to form the heavens and the earth. But in Genesis, there's no violence, no war, just a word. So there is some difference there. But God speaks in the Bible, and the boundaries appear. And this really shows us a big difference too, because this shows us something about God's character. He's not just powerful. He's wise. He governs. He names. He assigns. He doesn't just make things. He gives them meaning. Now that said, we've seen that Genesis is seen what Genesis is doing. It isn't giving us a scientific description of the sky. It's giving us this picture of God establishing order in a way that people of the time would understand. The firmament may have been imagined as a solid dome, but the function it represents, the dividing of water, creating space, and sustaining life, is what is actually what matters here. It's the point of what's being said. And this theme continues directly into verses 9 and 10, which, again, if we read this, like a geologist, we might ask, what exactly did the continents form? What are plate tectonics involved here? But again, they would be missing the point, because Genesis isn't about timelines. It's about how land physically rose out of the sea, or it's not about how land physically rose out of the sea. It's a sea, at least in a literal sequence of natural events. It's about something deeper, something theological and functional again. In the ancient Near East world, water was chaos. It wasn't natural. It was threatening, untamed, unstable. Too much water meant a flood. Too little meant famine. Water was the thing people feared and longed to control. So when God gathers the water in verse 9, He's not just exposing some hidden dirt. He's taming chaos. He's establishing boundaries. He's saying, this far you may come, no further. I'm just imagining that one fantasy movie where he's doing the dragon. You come no further. I can't remember what it's called. But anyways, what appears and what appears as a result from that? Dry land. A stable piece, a foundation, a home. This is the first time we see a space where human life can actually be sustained. Land for farming and building, for community. It's not just physical, it's purposeful. Then, just with the light and the sky, God names the results. The dry land is called earth, and the gathered waters is called the sea, right? And remember, what we've already seen, the name of something in the Bible is to assign a function. God is telling the land and the sea what role they will play in His world. Earth will be a place where civilization will grow. Seas will be the great boundaries, vast, powerful, but held in check. Both have their assigned roles in the structure of creation. So this is again not about creation from nothing. It's order from chaos. Sorry. So we're not reading about God building land like a sculptor with raw clay or anything. We're reading about how God brings structure to something that already existed in an unproductive, chaotic form. This is not, again, about those material origins that a lot of people would want it to be about, where God works as a magician. Instead, it's about a functional inauguration. I can't say the word. It's about the beginning of something being functional. Dry land didn't exist in the ancient mind until it had a role, until it had a name, until it fit a purpose. And that's exactly what God is doing here. He's bringing forth a functional cosmos, and He's doing it piece by piece. So by gathering the waters and assigning space to land and sea, God is shaping the world ready for life to flourish. He's not just making things, He's making things work. He's transforming disorder into a world where life can happen, where humans can live, and where God can dwell in His creation. And that's the message that we see in all the way from Genesis verses 1 through 10 here that we've gone through so far, is that it's not a manual on physics. The Bible, anyway, is not a manual on physics or chemistry, but instead it's a declaration of our world, and our world is not random. It's not meaningless, but it's structured, ordered, and filled with purpose by a wise, sovereign creator. So Anyways, time's up on this video, but I hope you'll stay with me. There is more coming.